10 months after I cut off my entire family for betraying me, my ex-fiancé and my sister showed up at my door, tears streaming down their faces, claiming the baby Madison was holding was the family's only heir. They were demanding $45,000, the exact amount needed to halt the immediate auction and save the lake house from foreclosure. So I slid a DNA paternity kit through the mail slot and burned every bridge left standing. I need to tell you something that happened last week. But first, you need to understand the 10 months before it. Leave a comment letting me know what city you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know where our community is. I sat back in my leather chair, watching the high-definition feed of my hallway on the security monitor. Tyler was jiggling the handle now, his face reddening with a mix of confusion and entitled rage. He actually looked at the brass key in his hand as if it had betrayed him. He didn't realize that the very night I left the lake house, I didn't just walk away, I erased his access. Changing those locks was the first blueprint I drew for my new life. Madison shifted the infant in her arms. The baby was wrapped in a designer blanket that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She caught the eye of the doorbell camera and turned on the waterworks. It was a practiced influencer-style weep, just enough to look vulnerable, without ruining her complexion. It was the same look she used when she wanted our parents to buy her a new car, or when she wanted to justify taking something that belonged to me. As I watched them, I felt that familiar coldness wash over me. Some psychologists call it the freeze response. They paint it as a sign of weakness, the moment a victim becomes paralyzed by their predator. But they have it wrong. For a survivor like me, the freeze isn't paralysis. It's a calculated sharpening of the senses. It's the moment the noise of the world cuts out, so I can focus entirely on the structural flaws of the person standing in front of me. I wasn't frozen in fear. I was calibrated. I was a structural engineer looking at a building about to collapse, and I was making sure I wasn't inside when it happened. My heart rate didn't even spike. I just watched, observing the termites as they tried to find a way back into the foundation. I reached out and pressed the intercom button. My voice was level, clinical, and stripped of any warmth. The key won't work, Tyler. It hasn't worked for 10 months. He jumped, looking around for the speaker. Sloane? Sloane, open the door! We need help. Madison and the baby. They have nowhere to go. The bank is coming for the lake house. Dad is falling apart. We're all falling apart. Your financial disasters are no longer my concern, I replied. I'm not opening this door. Not today, not ever. How can you be so heartless? Madison wailed toward the camera, holding the baby up like a shield. This is your family. This is your nephew. He deserves a future. I don't have a family, I said. I have a collection of people who share my DNA and a history of exploiting my labor. As for the child, the DNA kit is in the mail slot. Use it or don't. But know this. Every word you've spoken since you stepped onto this floor has been recorded. This video is being automatically uploaded to a secure server. If you are still standing in this hallway in 60 seconds, those recordings will be handed directly to the police, along with a petition for a permanent restraining order. I've already drafted the paperwork. Tyler started to shout something about loyalty and the 30 years of history we shared, but I simply muted the audio. I watched their mouths move on the silent screen, angry, desperate, and utterly powerless. I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. I didn't have time for their drama. I had a forensic audit to finish. The silence in my loft was beautiful. It was a structural integrity I had earned, and I wasn't about to let them back in to rot it from the inside out. I closed my eyes and let the hum of the city fade, replaced by the ghost of a string quartet and the heavy scent of expensive lilies. The 30th anniversary gala. The lake house was lit up like a jewel, a monument to my parents' supposed success, designed to distract from the crumbling foundation of their real lives. I had stepped away from the crowd to find Tyler, my fiancé of 3 years. Instead, I found him in the boathouse with Madison. My younger sister, the family's fragile doll, the girl whose image was a carefully curated project for my mother. They weren't just talking. They were sober, deliberate, and utterly indifferent to the wedding Tyler and I were supposed to have in 3 weeks. When I walked back into the main house, my face as cold and unyielding as granite, my mother, Patricia, intercepted me. She didn't ask why I was trembling or if I needed a moment. She looked at me with those sharp, socialite eyes and hissed that I needed to be the big person. She told me Madison was going through a fragile phase and that any scene I made would ruin the night's reputation. I watched her eyes darting to our high society guests, and I realized something profound about the architecture of our family. This was the sunk cost fallacy of blood. My parents had invested so much social capital into Madison's golden child image that they couldn't afford to see her as a villain. Admitting her betrayal meant admitting their own failure as builders of their legacy. So they chose to double down on the lie, using me as the temporary scaffolding to keep their prestige from collapsing. My legitimate anger was just an inconvenient structural flaw they wanted to plaster over. The next morning, I didn't cry. I went to check the family trust account. My mother still managed the $45,000 I'd saved from my architectural commissions. It was empty. My mother hadn't just covered for their affair. She'd used my wedding fund to pay off my father's business debts, buying his silence, and their country club status with my future. I had been the silent investor in their version of family, and now I realized it had been a subscription where I was the only one footing the bill. I realized then that I wasn't a daughter to them. I was the invisible support beam. I was the one expected to bear the weight of their mistakes while the termites ate through the wood. They didn't love me. They needed my structural integrity to mask their own internal rot. That was the day I realized that some buildings aren't worth restoring. Some are better off leveled so you can build something honest on the cleared ground. The silence of my loft was broken less than an hour later, when the digital noise began. Patricia didn't wait for the sun to set before launching her first strike. I watched the notifications roll in on my phone, but I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I went back to my workstation. I didn't feel the need to defend myself, because I knew exactly what she was doing. She was attempting to control the narrative before the structural collapse of her social standing became public. She posted a high-resolution photo of the lake house on her public Facebook page, the one she uses to maintain her carefully curated image among the local socialites. The caption was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. She called me a heartless daughter who had abandoned her family in their darkest hour. She painted a picture of herself as a grieving mother, shocked that I could be so cruel as to ignore my own newborn nephew. Within minutes, her friends were commenting with prayers for her broken heart and expressing indignation that a daughter could be so ungrateful after everything her parents had supposedly sacrificed for her. Then came the texts from Madison. They weren't meant for public consumption. They were raw, desperate, and filled with legal threats. She clearly didn't have the vocabulary to back up. She told me that the stress of my psychological harassment was making it impossible for her to recover from childbirth. She claimed my coldness was a form of assault against a new mother. Then she got to the point. The money. She demanded that I release the $12,000 I had in my personal savings account to pay for her medical needs and Tyler's transition into their new life. She told me that if I didn't comply, she would sue me for every penny I had and make sure I never worked as an architect again. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I just opened my laptop and started archiving. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon a single drop of regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and now they were discovering that the line of credit was permanently closed. I spent the next several hours in a state of cold calculation, performing what I thought of as a structural inspection of their lies. Every post, every text, and every hateful comment was screenshotted and uploaded to a secure digital vault I had already labeled the liar's audit. This was the villain's escalation phase, and I was giving them all the rope they needed to hang their own reputations. They thought they could bully me into compliance using the same psychological termites they'd used for 3 decades, but they hadn't realized that I had already moved out of the building. I wasn't reacting to their smears. I was indexing them. Inside my loft, the only glow came from my monitor, a light made of facts, numbers, and the beginning of a very quiet retribution. I didn't hire a therapist to process the betrayal. I hired a forensic accountant named Marcus. He was recommended by a colleague who specialized in commercial litigation, a man who understood that sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to cauterize it with data. When I handed him the keys to the joint account records, I wasn't looking for an apology or a way to forgive. I was looking for the exact coordinates of their theft. Marcus didn't offer sympathy. He offered ledger entries and a timeline of unauthorized transfers. Within 72 hours, the audit revealed the structural rot I'd been sensing for years. The $45,000 I'd meticulously saved for my wedding hadn't just vanished into thin air. Patricia had funneled the entire amount through 3 different accounts to buy out the silent creditors threatening my father's business. Robert wasn't just going through a rough patch. He was on the edge of a total financial collapse. They hadn't just betrayed my trust. They had used my future as a life raft for their sinking social status. It was embezzlement, plain and simple, masked by the toxic expectation that my resources were theirs to claim. As an architect, my entire career is dedicated to the concept of structural integrity. You cannot save a building once the foundation has been compromised by termites. This is the essence of the silent architect's justice. People think revenge is a loud, messy explosion, but real justice is much more precise. It's the calculated removal of the single pillar that holds up a monument of lies. To my family, this would look like I was tearing them down, but I knew better. I was performing a controlled demolition of a dangerous structure. This wasn't about hurting them. It was about ensuring they could never crush me under their rubble again. You have to clear the ground completely if you want to plant a future that isn't destined to rot. I spent the next week immersed in the construction of the liar's audit. It wasn't an emotional journal. It was a digital executioner. I meticulously indexed every one of Patricia's fraudulent signatures. I cross-referenced their country club membership dues against the tax returns where Robert claimed 0 income. I included the doorbell camera footage of them attempting to force my lock and every defamatory post they'd made on social media. Each file was a component of a larger machine designed to deliver truth. They were so convinced of their own power because they still had the lake house and the invitations to the right parties. But power without integrity is just a heavy weight balanced on a toothpick. I wasn't the strong one they could exploit anymore. I was the person who knew exactly which toothpicks to pull. I felt a cold sense of purpose as I uploaded the final bank statement. The audit was complete, a precise, documented, and undeniable record of their systemic fraud. It was the blueprint for a collapse they were too arrogant to see coming. The email notification arrived at precisely 6:39 on a Saturday morning. I was already at my desk, the glow of the dual monitors reflecting off the surface of my cold coffee. I didn't feel the frantic pulse of a woman whose world was about to change. I felt the steady, calibrated focus of a professional about to witness a predicted structural collapse. I clicked the attachment and didn't even blink as the digital file loaded. Probability of paternity, 0%. 0. It was a perfect, absolute circle. Not 0.1%, not a statistical margin for error, just a clean mathematical void where Tyler's legacy was supposed to be. I sat there for a long moment, the silence of my loft amplifying the weight of that number. Madison hadn't just betrayed me by sleeping with my fiancé. She had betrayed her own accomplice. The golden couple was a farce within a farce. She had used Tyler to break my heart, and then she had used someone else to break Tyler's foundation. The infant she had been brandishing like a weapon of mass guilt wasn't even a relative. It was just a prop in an elaborate, desperate attempt to liquidate my savings. But the true rot was deeper than Madison's infidelity. I navigated to the metadata of the clinic's original appointment confirmation email, the one they had sent to me to prove they were following through with the test. I had cached the file before Tyler had tried to recall it, but now I was looking at the raw header data, the digital fingerprints most people ignore. There, embedded in the transaction metadata as the primary payer and financial guarantor for the test, was my mother's private email address. The discovery was clinical, almost refreshing in its clarity. Patricia hadn't just been hoping for a reconciliation. She had been the lead architect of the entire fraud. She was copied on the scheduling. She was copied on the payment confirmations. She knew the child wasn't a biological heir before they ever stepped foot in my hallway. She had stood by and watched Madison weep about biological duties and family blood, while knowing every word was a calculated lie. She had authorized the use of a child who was only 4 weeks old to try and extort $45,000 from me to pay off Robert's business debts. This was no longer a case of toxic family dynamics or sisterly rivalry. This was a coordinated criminal conspiracy to commit financial fraud and extortion. They weren't just bad people. They were amateurs trying to run a con on a woman who spends her life calculating the load-bearing capacity of reinforced concrete. They thought my compassion was a structural weakness they could exploit one last time. They didn't realize that when I moved out of the lake house, I didn't just leave the building, I took the only support beam with me. I felt a profound sense of liberation as I dragged the DNA results and the metadata screenshots into the folder I had labeled the liar's audit. The criminal twist was the final bolt I needed to secure the demolition. There was no path to redemption left for them. No misunderstanding could explain away a carbon copy line in a paternity test confirmation. I picked up my phone and sent a one-word text to my forensic accountant and my legal counsel. Proceed. The audit was about to go live. I didn't send a mass email to our social circle. That would have been an emotional reaction. And I was far past being reactive. Instead, I hit send on the encrypted files destined for the Internal Revenue Service and my lead litigation attorney. I watched the progress bar hit 100% with the same satisfaction I felt when a building passed a final safety inspection. The demolition charges were set. 2 hours later, Patricia and Robert walked into my architectural firm. They didn't have an appointment, but they carried the same aura of unearned authority they'd used to rule the lake house for 30 years. They were dressed for a gala, Robert in a tailored suit, and Patricia in a silk wrap that screamed old money. They looked imposing to the receptionist, but through the glass wall of my office, I saw the truth. They were living in the illusion of power. They thought that because they still occupied a certain tax bracket and held a certain membership at the country club, they were untouchable. They didn't realize their power was entirely built on a foundation of my silence and my $45,000. When you have an empty wallet, that kind of arrogance is just a costume. Patricia didn't even wait for me to look up. She slammed her designer clutch onto my desk. Sloane, enough of this. We are here to finalize the transfer of your savings. I didn't blink. I simply pushed copies of the legal filings across the mahogany surface, knowing the originals were being served to you by a professional downstairs. I've already finalized a transfer, Patricia, but it wasn't money. It was evidence. Robert grabbed the folders, his face darkening. What is this? It's the liar's audit, I said, my voice clinical and quiet. The first folder contains the 0% paternity results for the child Madison is holding. It also includes the metadata proving you were an accomplice in the attempted extortion. The second folder is the formal summons. I'm suing you for the embezzlement of my $45,000 plus interest and emotional damages. Patricia's face went a sickly shade of ash. You wouldn't. The scandal, it will ruin us. The ruin has already started. The IRS has been notified with irrevocable evidence of Robert's real business ledgers. The audit is inevitable, and you can't talk your way out of the numbers. I reached into my desk and pulled out a simple sticky note with a scribbled address. I slid it on top of the legal summons. And here is the address for a mobile home park 3 towns over. It's affordable, and from what I understand, they don't have a dress code. You'll need a place to stay once the bank finishes seizing the lake house. Robert started to shout, his voice cracking with the realization of his own powerlessness. Patricia just stared at the map, her hands trembling. "I'm not destroying this family," I said as I signaled for security. "I'm just withdrawing the only support beam that was holding up your ruins. I'm done bearing the weight of your rot. Goodbye, Patricia. Goodbye, Robert." I watched through the glass as security escorted them out of the building. They looked small. For the first time in my life, the landscape in front of me was perfectly clear. I stood in my new office on the 42nd floor, watching the morning fog over San Francisco Bay beginning to break. 10 months ago, I was an invisible support beam in a house built on rot, holding up a legacy that didn't even belong to me. Today, I am the lead architect of my own horizon, finalizing the partnership I had earned years ago. The one I had delayed to fund your lifestyle didn't just come with a better view, it came with the absolute silence I needed to finally hear my own voice without the interference of their expectations. I've come to realize that blood is a biological accident, but family is a deliberate choice, based on integrity and mutual respect. My parents didn't lose a daughter because of a DNA test. They lost me because they valued an illusion of social standing more than the human being standing right in front of them. If you find yourself in a similar situation, if you've spent years being the one who bears the weight while everyone else takes the credit, remember that you don't need permission to exit a building that is already falling down. This is a letter to those of you who have always felt like you're on the outside looking in, even at your own family's table. The revolution of choice starts the moment you stop asking for approval from people who only see you as a resource. Forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free from the burden of their mistake. I didn't just burn a bridge. I redesigned the entire landscape so the bridge was never necessary in the first place. You are not a line item on someone else's balance sheet. You are the architect of your own peace. If you've ever had to play the strong one while your family treated you like a cash machine, this story was for you. Please like, share, and subscribe to join our community of those who value truth and boundaries. Wishing you a day of peace, clarity, and independence.